God's story, our story, and why it matters. This will be the second to last installment tonight, and tomorrow we'll conclude this homily series. I hope most of you have found this helpful and thought-provoking. As we travel through the Old Testament and its various stories, we now come to that moment that all the other stuff that we've talked about, and so much more, was all pointing towards the incarnation, the moment of our rescue, when God becomes man. Remember, we had it all. Literally, paradise was ours, but Adam and Eve sought to be on equal terms with God, not content to be his creatures. And just as Lucifer sought to replace God, human beings did the same. This happened because the ancient enemy entered paradise and seduced our first parents. And in doing so, the enemy captured us in our sin. The enemy captured mankind. But not just his temptations proved to be so irresistible to us. What's even more important, though, is that we chose. By our own free will, we chose to give in to those temptations. We chose sin over God. We chose our way over God's way. And as a result, we lost it all. Yet, God didn't give up on us. He sought to rescue us from the prison of our sin that our choices, prompted by the devil's urgings, had created. And how was God to do this? Well, he could have just sent his army of angels down to battle Satan and his demons. That would have been fantastic. I mean, that would have been great. That certainly would have crushed the power of Satan and freed us from this unrelenting temptation that we experience. However, instead, in a way that no one would have ever thought of, that no one would have even dreamed of, God chooses an extraordinary act of condescension, of humility, and God chooses to come himself to do battle for his wayward creatures. Just imagine this, a king putting aside his armor, instructing his army to stand down, and then he himself walks into the battlefield to face down the enemy. And not just that, who is he coming to fight for? He's coming to fight for a portion of his creation that has consistently rejected and rebelled against him. It's just unheard of. Never done before, never done since. And yet there's more. He's not only took on humans' ancient enemy himself, but he also took the very nature of the race he created. He came among us as one of us in a type of disguise. Just imagine. The creator of all that is humbles himself and takes on the flesh of humanity. He who is without limit and could not suffer became man so that he could suffer for his children. The incarnation is the most astounding belief ever seriously considered by humankind. No other religion, no other spiritual or political leader has ever made the claim that Jesus has made, that he is the embodiment of God in human flesh. Now, if it's true, then the incarnation becomes the interpretive key that unlocks the inner meaning of all human history and unveils the purpose of every humankind. If it's not true, then Christian narrative and the whole Christian religious tradition is a lie and a cheat and should be rejected outright as dangerous and destructive philosophy. But it's not a lie. It is true. This whole Advent, we've immersed ourselves in God's story, seeing how God's story is really our story too, and realizing if we don't understand and learn the lessons taught to humanity over and over and over and over again, we're going to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And then we're going to be left in the prison of our sin. We'll be left without meaning or purpose. Broken, bitter, alienated. And we know it's true and not a lie when we read about Noah, when we read about Sodom and Gomorrah, we read about the Tower of Babel. Over and over and over again, unexplainable events, astounding occurrences. Abraham and Sarah, who are in their old age, parent a child that our science today would tell us is impossible. Abraham makes an impossible choice in offering up his son as an act of faith. And God blesses him and says to him, makes a promise to him, your descendants, because he was willing to offer his only descendant, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the heaven. The Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, the Christian faith, all claim Abraham as their father in faith. There are 16.2 million Jews on the planet today. There's 1.8 billion Muslims living today. There are 2.4 billion Christians. Over half the world's population can be traced to Abraham. Our God keeps his promises. Over and over and over again, God's story reveals how he takes what the world rejects, what the world considers as insignificant, and he makes miracles happen with it. Yet over and over and over again, God's story reveals how in our story, we keep turning our backs on him, how we consistently, even when we're blessed and favored, choose our way over God's way, choose to put other things before our God, choose sin. Noah's son sleeps with his mother. Abraham gives his wife to a king to save his own skin. Jacob cheats his brother out of his birthright. Jacob, in turn, is cheated out of his wife that he bartered for. Samson gives in to temptation and loses his power. Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery. Israel repeatedly gives itself over and over and over again to false gods and loses its status as a united nation. Every sin that man could commit is recorded in the Old Testament. And if we're honest, we can see ourselves in those stories. Sinful and broken by our poor choices, alienated and alone because we choose other things over our God, imprisoned by our own sin because we keep choosing our way over God's way. And the good news is that it's not the only story we can write for our lives. God calls us to glory. We can live in his light. We can trust in his grace and claim righteousness that God intended for us. We can live holy lives. We began this series, Father Declan and I, about 8 weeks ago. And our hope was to help all of us regroup, refocus, and finally make the right decision to humble ourselves before our Creator and commit ourselves to live in his light, loving God, loving our neighbor, serving the poor, to be disciples who make disciples. Let the church say,